Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going really deep, like basement deep, into the Josef Fritzl case.
Yeah, it's one of those cases that just gets under your skin. It's
It's stranger than fiction.
exactly.
So we've got court documents, we've got psychological reports, and we've got some pretty disturbing interviews with Fritzl himself.
It's going to be a heavy one, but I think it's important to understand the layers of this case. Not just what happened, but like why.
Yeah, the psychology behind it all. What made this guy tick?
Exactly.
So let's start with Josef Fritzl himself. Like, what kind of guy was he before all this came out?
Well, on the surface, pretty average, actually. He was an engineer, had a wife, kids, but there are some hints of a darker side in his past.
Oh, like what?
Well, his childhood was pretty rough. He grew up in Austria right after World War II, had a really domineering, abusive mother.
Ah, so that's where it started.
It's possible. A lot of experts think that early trauma can, really mess you up. It can create this need for control.
Makes sense.
And you definitely see that with Fritzl. He was super controlling with his wife, Rosemary.
Yeah, I read that she was basically living in fear of him.
Totally. Their home was like this pressure cooker of control and silence. And then in 1984, things went from bad to, well.
To absolutely horrific.
Right. That's when he imprisoned his own daughter, Elisabeth, in the basement.
It's just mind-blowing that someone could do that to their own child.
And it wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. He actually spent years building this soundproof dungeon under the house.
Like he planned this.
Meticulously. It shows a level of premeditation that's just chilling.
Wow. And did anyone, suspect anything?
Nope. Fritzl was a master manipulator. He told everyone that Elisabeth had run away to join a cult.
A cult?
Yeah. And then when Elisabeth started having babies down there,
Oh my God.
he'd bring the babies upstairs and claim that Elisabeth had abandoned them on the doorstep.
And people believe that.
He was incredibly convincing. He even fooled social workers.
So for over 2 decades, this was going on right under everyone's noses.
It's a testament to how good he was at lying and, how easily people can be deceived by appearances.
And all that time, Elisabeth was trapped down there. What was her life like?
It's almost too horrible to imagine. She was raped repeatedly, gave birth to 7 of his children in that cellar.
It's unimaginable.
I know. And to make matters worse, the sources mention that Fritzl would force Elisabeth to watch porn.
What? Why?
And then make her reenact it. It was beyond just control. It was about humiliation and power.
That's just sick.
Yeah, it's really disturbing, and it points to a much deeper psychological disturbance.
I think we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, there's so much more to unpack.
Yeah.
It really is this need to control and humiliate. It's like textbook sadism.
It's really disturbing. But it sounds like this wasn't just some random act of cruelty. There were specific things about Elisabeth that triggered him.
Right. He actually said that she reminded him of his own mother, Maria.
His mother, the one who abused him.
Yeah. He said that Elisabeth, as a teenager, started to rebel, typical teenage stuff.
Right.
But for Fritzl, it was like this echo of his own mother's dominance. And it triggered this intense need to, put her in her place.
So he was basically reenacting his own trauma, but this time he was the one in control.
Exactly. He even admitted to having, incestuous feelings towards his own mother.
Okay.
Which is, obviously super messed up, but it kind of explains why he fixated on Elisabeth.
Yeah. It's like this cycle of abuse repeating itself.
It's a really sad but important point. It shows how deeply trauma can impact us,
Yeah.
and how it can distort our relationships.
But it's still not an excuse for what he did.
No, absolutely not. And his need for control didn't stop with Elisabeth either. He was also abusive towards his wife, Rosemary.
Yeah, I read that he would, humiliate her in public.
Totally. He'd belittle her, brag about his affairs. It was all about power.
It's like he needed to dominate every woman in his life.
Right. And you see that even more clearly when you look at how he treated his own mother.
What do you mean?
So after he and Rosemary got married, his mother moved in with them.
Okay.
But instead of taking care of her, he locked her in the attic.
What?
For 20 years, until she died.
No way.
He boarded up the windows, told everyone she was already dead.
That's insane. So it's like this pattern of abuse, right? First his mother, then his wife, and then ultimately Elisabeth.
Yeah, it's like this escalating cycle of control and dominance.
And the psychological evaluation, it must have been pretty intense.
Oh, yeah. They diagnosed him with all sorts of personality disorders, narcissistic personality disorder, sexual sadism, like the whole 9 yards.
So even the experts were like, this guy is seriously messed up.
Yeah. They said he needed, like, lifelong psychiatric care.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, when he was first arrested, he pleaded not guilty.
Not guilty. After all that.
I know, right? His lawyers tried to downplay everything, said he wasn't a monster, even brought up how he'd bring a Christmas tree down to the cellar for Elisabeth and the kids.
Like, that makes it okay.
Right. It was ridiculous. But then, on the second day of the trial, Elisabeth showed up.
Oh, wow.
And Fritzl, like, completely lost it. He went pale, started crying. It was like he finally saw the reality of what he'd done.
Maybe a glimmer of guilt.
Who knows? But the next day, he changed his plea to guilty on all charges.
So he finally admitted it.
Yep. And he got sentenced to life in prison, which is, probably where he belongs.
Yeah. I mean, what else could they do? But even after all that, did he ever show any remorse?
That's the thing, he didn't. He still claimed that Elisabeth and the kids enjoyed living in the cellar, that they had a normal family life.
That's messed up.
It really is. Like, even after being caught and convicted, he was still trapped in his own twisted reality.
It makes you wonder if some people are just, like, incapable of facing the truth about themselves.
I mean, how could you? To admit what he'd done would be to admit he was a monster. And maybe that was just too much for him to handle.
So he's locked away. But what about Elisabeth and the kids? Like, how do you even begin to recover from something like that?
It's a long and difficult process. The sources talk about how they had to learn, like, everything from scratch.
Like what?
Well, imagine never having seen the sun or felt rain.
Oh, my God.
Or even just being in a wide open space. Like, it was all completely new to them.
That must have been so overwhelming.
Totally. And then there's the trauma, the psychological scars.
Yeah.
The kids who were born in the cellar, they had all sorts of health problems, vitamin D deficiency, infections, anxiety.
Makes sense.
And some of them would have, like, panic attacks from things like dimming the lights or closing doors.
Wow.
Because it reminded them of being locked up.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. And it wasn't just the kids from the cellar who were affected. The kids who lived upstairs, they had their own issues. Yeah. Like, imagine finding out your dad had imprisoned your sister and fathered her children.
Oh, God. That's just...
It's a lot to process. They were angry, confused, resentful. Like, how could their parents let this happen?
Yeah. It's like their whole family was built on a lie.
Exactly. So, yeah, it was a really tough situation for everyone involved.
So how do they all cope?
Well, they all got a lot of therapy, counseling, medical treatment.
Good.
And eventually they moved to a new town, somewhere quiet where they could try to rebuild their lives, away from all the media and the public scrutiny.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that must have been like for them, to have their whole story splashed across the newspapers.
It was crazy. But the good news is they seem to be doing okay now.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, they're living a private life, trying to heal and move on.
And Elisabeth, how's she doing?
She's actually in a relationship now with one of the bodyguards who worked on the case.
Wow. That's amazing.
I know, right? It's like even after all that darkness, she was able to find love and happiness.
That gives me hope.
Me too. It shows that even in the darkest of times, there's always a chance for healing and recovery. And that's really what this case is all about, isn't it? Like, yeah, it's about the horror of what happened, but it's also about the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a reminder that even in the face of pure evil, there's still hope, still a chance to find light. So I guess the takeaway here is we can never really know what goes on behind closed doors.
Right. And if something feels wrong, we need to speak up.
Absolutely. If you see something, say something. You might just save a life.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been a heavy one, but an important one. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Of course. It's what we do here.
And for all you listeners out there, if you want to dive deeper into true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Case Closed. We've got tons of videos exploring the psychology behind some of the most fascinating and disturbing cases out there. Until next time, stay curious.